Retired police detective David Paulides was asked to look into strange missing person cases in US national forests and parks. He thought little of it, but after strange roadblocks into his investigations and more than a little digging, Paulides found the circumstances of these disappearances to be more than a little odd. On top of the strangeness was the sheer number of cases. 411 to be exact. But stranger than the cases themselves, some of the similarities between them were, well, weird. Some of the people were never heard from again. Some came back. Their stories are some of the weirdest. This is Marc W. Shako's Weird World, and these are the stories of the missing 411. Let's get weird.
The history of mankind is riddled with the weird and the wonderful. Bizarre people, strange places, and odd events. For centuries, we've told each other fantastic stories around campfires and in darkened rooms. Tales of ghosts, UFOs, and conspiracies. But are these stories exactly that? Stories? There's only one way to find out. Dive into the rabbit hole and enter Marc W. Shako's Weird World.
Hello, we're back. Have you missed me? Welcome to Marc W. Shako's Weird World. This time we are looking into a really strange one. It's the missing 411. Remember to like, share, subscribe as we go down the rabbit hole, looking at one of the stranger mysteries of the 20th century, the late 20th century. Let's waste no time. Let's get weird. So, as the story goes, retired police detective David Paulides was approached by an off-duty park ranger and asked to look into some strange missing person cases in US national forests and parks. Why did he ask Paulides? Well, in 1977, David Paulides began a 20-year career in law enforcement, transferring in 1980 to the San Jose Police Department, working in the patrol division on the SWAT team, Patrol and Street Crimes Unit, working his way up to the rank of detective. But he was known to park rangers for his work after retiring, because he was known to them as the man who researched Bigfoot. It was likely this interest in the unusual that made the park ranger comfortable in approaching Paulides in the first place, and it made Paulides the ideal candidate to investigate such an odd case. You see, according to the park ranger, he and the other park rangers would talk amongst themselves about how often people went missing. Bad enough, but worse still was how nothing ever seemed to come of their reporting. Folks vanished and nothing. Weird? Not especially, but there's more. The stories of the missing people shared similar connecting themes and bizarre circumstances. Intrigued, Paulides decided to look into it. It took little digging for him to find these instances of missing people in the park were far more prevalent than anyone would care to admit. Keen to get more data, Paulides reached out to the various national parks about those missing persons to ask for a list of their current cases. Being a former police officer, he was familiar with police protocols for missing person cases, knowing you could walk into any precinct, just ask for the information, and they'd happily hand a list over to you, hoping to get help solving and therefore closing open cases. He was expecting the same for national parks. He was wrong. According to Paulides, when he asked Yosemite for their data, they told him they'd be happy to put a list together for $34,000. Frustrated by the seeming unwillingness to help, in the end he did what he could to get his hands on as much data from as many national parks as he could. He filed a Freedom of Information request. Soon after, instead of getting the data he wanted, he received a call from a lawyer from the National Park Service. The lawyer told him they don't keep a list. Instead, they rely on the memories of their staff to keep track of these cases. They don't keep files. They don't keep lists of people who've gone missing in their parks. Paulides can't have a list because one doesn't exist. Now the dogged investigator is really interested. It was time for boots on the ground investigation. Hundreds of interviews and thousands of hours later, Paulides had found 411 cases of missing persons in US national parks. And the rangers were right. Some of the similarities were indeed creepy. Some of the people were never heard of again, some came back, and their stories are stranger still. Now, I would like to take a pop at Wikipedia for their gatekeeping, so here's their take on the Missing 411. Missing 411 is a series of self-published books and films which document cases of people who've gone missing in national parks and elsewhere, and assert that these cases are unusual and mysterious, contrary to data analysis which suggests they are not actually statistically mysterious or even unexpected. Shall we look into some of the stories and see if they're actually statistically mysterious or even unexpected for ourselves? Yes. Yes, we will. Here are 7 stories from my blog and a top 10s list. That's 10s with a Z. That's an article by Shannon Quinn. Those links are in the description. Without further ado, let's go. Stephen Kubatsky. February 1978. 24-year-old Stephen Kubatsky was cross-country skiing through the snow near Lake Michigan. Upon reaching the edge of the lake, he removed his skis for a short rest. Then it gets weird. When Stephen was reported missing, the search team sent out to find Kubatsky found his poles and skis at the edge of the lake. There was only one set of his footprints leading toward the water, but none walking away. The natural assumption was he'd drowned himself in the lake. The waters must have been freezing and he'd been missing for so long it was thought that Stephen must be dead. He was not. Stephen remembers walking up to the lake and resting, but when it came time to go, his own tracks that had got him to the lake's edge were gone. Strange. Next thing he knows, he's lost. Lost in the snow. The last thing he remembers is getting tired, dizzy, and blacking out. When he came to, he was in a grassy clearing in a forest in clothes that were not his own. More than that, after going missing in the snow, he was shocked to see it was now spring. Baffled, he headed for the nearest town and asked a local where he was. The answer left him more confused. Pittsfield. Pittsfield, Massachusetts. 700 miles from where he'd gone missing. Perhaps more bizarrely than the distance he's travelled, he knew the name of the town he was in because he had family there. An aunt. He went to her and she asked where he'd been. Stephen had no answer. Here's the thing. The aunt tells Stephen that he's been missing for 14 months. So what happened? Nobody really knows. Least of all, fucking Wikipedia. Stephen was so fascinated by his own case that he went on to earn a PhD in psychology. Solving the mystery of his own disappearance and reappearance became an obsession. He went on to publish a book called Metamathematical Foundations of Existence, Gödel, Quantum, God, and Beyond. In it, he writes about the possibility of alternate universes. Gödel, by the way, is considered along with Aristotle to be one of the most significant logicians in history. Let's see if this next case is in any way unexpected. Morris Stamets. For this next one, we'll fast forward to April of 1981. 84-year-old Morris Stamets went topaz hunting with his friend David McSweeney. They headed to Pike National Forest in Colorado. Once they reached the park, they had to drive a further 16 miles down a dirt road until they reached a spot called Topaz Point. Native Americans claimed Topaz Point was haunted by evil spirits. Not being funny, but when Native Americans are saying shit like that, you pay attention. Early settlers called this place the Devil's Head. Morris is 84, so his knees are shot. Fair enough. They head into the forest where David helps him down a small hill to get to a sandy digging spot. David heads off somewhere close by and does digging of his own. When it's time to go, David heads back to Morris and says that they should go in about 10 minutes. All good. David goes back to the 150 yards to his own digging spot to pack up his kit and returns to Morris. The elderly man is gone. With his knees, it's impossible for Maurice to climb back up the small hill from his digging spot on his own. There were no screams or cries for help, and the state of his legs also means he couldn't have gone far, and yet he was nowhere to be found. David honked the car horn, shouting for him, and searched for him for a long time. McSweeney eventually flagged down a car and asked them to get the police while he carried on searching. A 5-day search revealed nothing. No clothes, no body, no blood. The case was closed. David Paulides made a mini-documentary about the missing 411 which pointed out there have been a cluster of similar disappearances in Devil's Head. After premiering the mini-doc, the police reopened the Morris Dammett's case over 30 years after his disappearance. Maybe it's just me, but I find the example of an 84-year-old man disappearing into thin air a little bit mysterious. But anyway, I'll leave it up to you to decide, and we'll move on to the next one. Keith Parkins. The 10th of April 1952, Ritter, Oregon. 2-year-old Keith Parkins was playing outside his home in the Oregon winter. When he went missing, a search party was formed and, because it was winter, a trail was soon found. However, after a while, Keith's tiny footprints stopped. While there was nothing to suggest the boy's life was in any imminent danger, in a strange way it was worse, because there was absolutely nothing to hint at what might have happened. No blood, no animal prints, no adult prints nearby, just a trail of small footprints and then nothing. 19 hours later, Keith was found by a pond, face down in the snow. He'd been out overnight in snowy sub-zero winter weather, and yet, miraculously, the boy was alive. The pond was 12 miles from where his trail of footprints vanished. 12 miles over 2 mountain ranges, fences, and creeks. At night. A toddler. Just to demonstrate how absolutely impossible it would have been for a 2-year-old to walk so far on his own in the dead of night, survival expert and filmmaker Les Stroud attempted to recreate the journey. It was 8 miles as the crow flies, but on foot, that path is completely off limits. The way is dotted with steep hills and barbed wire fences, and even with the aid of a full moon to light his way, Les Stroud could barely see where he was going. When they asked Keith why he'd run away and how he survived, he simply replied that he didn't remember. James McGrogan. The 14th of March 2014, Vail, Colorado. This story is about a doctor who practiced the sport of split snowboarding, which is, as it sounds, a snowboard split in two, like fat skis, for cross-country purposes. James McGrogan was split snowboarding along a popular trail with friends when he disappeared into thin air. Equipped with a backpack any survivalist would be proud of, including a satellite GPS system and a shovel amongst other things, James set off ahead of his friends and told them he'd meet them at the next stop. Of course, when they arrived at the next stop, James was nowhere to be seen. Thinking he'd carried on, they did too. It was when they realized he hadn't arrived at any of the other stops along the trail his friends began to worry. They doubled back, hoping they'd somehow manage to pass him on the trail, now paying extra attention to their surroundings, but what was strange was there were no prints leading away from the well-trodden trail. 5 days later, over 4 miles away, at the bottom of a frozen waterfall, James McGrogan's body was found. The area had been searched multiple times and, despite the fact James was wearing a helmet, his skull had been crushed as if he'd been dropped from a great height. To get to where he was found, he had to scale a peak, meaning the charged mobile phone he had would have had a signal, leaving investigators to wonder why he had made no attempt to call for help. While James was still wearing his ski suit, he was barefoot. His boots were never found. Dennis Martin. This next case is a rather well-known one because, basically, it's really weird. Wikipedia. Over Father's Day weekend in 1969, a 6-year-old Dennis Martin was at Smoky Mountains National Park along with his grandfather, father, and brother. After an uneventful night of camping, the next day a man approached Mr. Martin. The man had kids with him around the same age of Dennis and his brother, so he wanted to know if they wanted to play together. Alarm bells, you're thinking. Me too. But what actually happened is much stranger than that. The kids started a giant game of hide and seek. The watchful father monitored from a distance while young Dennis hid himself behind a tree. When the time came, the kids jumped out to reveal themselves. All except for Dennis. The concerned father ran over to the tree where he'd last seen Dennis, but alas, his son was gone. Dad ran for 2 miles along the nearby Appalachian Trail, calling for Dennis. The boy was nowhere to be found. A full-scale search was launched, and park rangers and the family spent all night looking for him, to no avail. The search went on for 6 weeks, and it was huge. Park rangers, local volunteers, even the FBI and Green Berets were involved. Now the story takes one very weird turn. When Paulides heard about the case and conducted his own interviews, he was put in touch with another family camping in the park that same weekend. The Key family had asked park rangers where they could go to see bears. When they arrived at the spot, they reported hearing a scream. Pointing at the top of the hill, the kid said he saw a bear. When they asked the father, he reported something very different. He said it was less a bear and more like a wild, hairy mountain man. Whatever this figure was, Mr. Key says it was dodging behind trees, carrying something over its shoulder. In Mr. Key's defence, dodging is not a verb I'd associate with bears. It evokes the image of something more light on its feet and nimble. Anyway, despite the efforts of volunteers, park rangers, the FBI and the Green Berets, all they managed to find was 1 shoe and 1 sock. The body of Dennis Martin was never found. David Paulides. This one's the 7th of February 2018 and we're back to skiing. Danny was on a ski trip with friends in New York. They'd been on the slopes for a while and decided to take a break for lunch. Danny told his friends that he wanted to go for 1 more run down the mountain, but by 4 p.m. Danny had failed to return. Naturally, his friends were worried by his failure to join them and alerted authorities. A search party of over 100 people was hastily assembled, but sadly, Danny was nowhere to be found. The search went on for 6 days. It was on day 6 when his wife got a bizarre phone call. The voice was faint, the line muffled by static, but the voice was unmistakably Danny's. He was confused and, after a short time, making little sense, he ended the call. his wife quickly called back and pleaded with him to call 911. Thankfully, he did just that. Unable to give information as to his whereabouts, and only able to describe his surroundings, it took police a while to find where he was calling from. When they got there, they found Danny bewildered, still in his ski gear, but listen to this. He had with him a brand new iPhone, suggesting he could have called home at any time. Not only that, but in the intervening 6 days, Danny had had a haircut. And he was found in California, 3,000 miles from where he'd gone missing. So just before we take one quick look at what could be going on here, there's time for a final story. And this is the story of Jared Atadero. 3-year-old Jared Atadero lived with his sister and father Alan at the resort Jared's dad worked at in a national park in Colorado, the Comanche Wilderness. Staying at the resort was a Christian singles group. The group offered to take Alan's kids with them to an excursion to a local fish hatchery. Thinking it would be a couple of hours and pretty harmless, Alan agreed. After the trip to the fish hatchery, the group decided to take a hike along a nearby trail. They never asked Alan's permission to take his kids on a walk along the rugged trail as well, but the group saw a sign for a nearby trail and made a last-minute decision to go through the forest. This is, of course, where things went wrong. The Christian singles were so involved in their own hike that they lost track of Jared. The small boy wandered away from the group. 2 fishermen were in the area at the nearby river and saw the boy walking alone, asking about bears. The fishermen assumed his parents must be nearby. After all, who in their right mind would let a kid walk alone through forests frequented by bears and mountain lions? Sadly, after this sighting, Jared was never seen again. Some 4 years later, in 2003, 2 hikers climbed up a steep rock face roughly 550 feet above the trail. They found a child's tooth and a piece of skull. Jared's clothes, which were mostly intact, had been taken off his body and turned inside out. His shoes, which were in remarkably good condition after 4 years in the wilderness, were there too. The area where his remains were found was far too difficult for a small child to climb by himself. So rugged was the terrain and the steepness of the climb, it would have been an unnecessarily difficult location for an adult kidnapper to carry him. The location also doesn't line up with a bear or cougar attack pattern because the clothes would have been ripped and covered in blood. The Atadero family, sadly, is left only with questions. All of these missing person cases and staticky phone calls sounds a lot like one of my novels, Jane Doe. Here's a short ad for it. Enjoy. The link for that one is in the description. So, that odd selection of stories actually share a few similarities between the other cases. Common themes that mark the disappearances are going missing in national parks, which we've covered. One thing we didn't really touch upon though is there's no scent trail for tracking dogs to find, which is bizarre. Then there's the memory loss, the missing clothing, a proximity to bodies of water, and the changes in elevation. Many of the younger children among the 411 are found after days of failed searching at distances miles from where they vanished, distances which they could have never travelled due to the terrain. The children showed barely any injuries and their clothes were strangely neat, even when the weather during the interval had been inclement. Although in most cases people literally vanish into thin air and are never seen again, in the handful of cases where missing persons are found alive, they're in a state of numb confusion at a great distance from where they disappeared. In these cases they cannot account for where they've been or what they were doing for that lost period. We don't really know what happened after they returned, if the memories ever came back, if the dreams were haunted by recollections of their experiences, but for Stephen Kubatsky it became a life's obsession, and, if something like that happened to me, I can see why. There is an overlaid map of missing persons in the US and cave systems, which does seem to line up pretty well, but that would only explain the disappearances, and not the missing time or returning 411ers. Theories abound, from aliens to Bigfoot to space-time wormholes, but nobody, not even Paulides and his thousands of hours of study, has any real notion as to what's going on with the so-called missing 411. I'll grant you, the examples today are a selected handful of the weirdest cases, but for Wikipedia to suggest there's no mystery here at all, well, I'll let you decide. Let me know wherever you're listening. Since his initial study, the total number of missing individuals Paulides has found has now grown to over 1,400. It has to be said that America's national parks receive millions of visitors a year, and of course, in such massive areas, it must be easy to get lost and into difficulty. That might account for some of the unfortunate souls that went missing never to be seen again. Even if it accounted for all of them, stories like the strange disappearance and reappearance of Stephen Kubatsky are not so easily explained. That's all from me. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep it weird. The intro music is Slasher by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. Check out his YouTube channel. The outro music is Lone Wolf by Guillaume Bernard. Please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review and share this episode wherever you may have heard it. And you can find me on Facebook and X as Marc W. Shako. For more information on my books and all things podcasty, visit www.marcwshako.com. Thanks for listening.